Today, we're going to dive into the topic of student schedules. We're going to explore different types of schedules that are available to support students. We are going to look at strategies for teaching them. You have to teach students how to use them. And we're going to provide you with educator tools to support implementation. So if you will, I would like you to imagine yourself as a young child with a disability. You don't have comprehension of time or language, and your experience is that adults in your environment just move you throughout your day. Maybe someone comes and they take your hand, and the next thing you know, you are in the nurse's office. Or without knowing why or what's happening, you are suddenly being pulled off to go to the gym for PE. That's your entire day. Someone's just taking your hand and taking you places, and you don't know where or why. You have no input and you don't have any control. You're just kind of a passive participant. How could you support this student? It's very easy to support them with a visual schedule, and then you're teaching them and allowing them to be an active participant. So could you see how a schedule could provide structure and flexibility, which can also help reduce anxiety, so they're not guessing what's coming next or where they're going? Schedules also support comprehension, and they're a great visual reminder for transitions. So this can be a great mental shift for students who have a difficult time comprehending language and time. Implementing a schedule for students who have a need for an adult to tell them what to do, the schedule allows them to move on from that. Like, they can do things independently. There's no better time to work on increasing student independence than right now. And if you think about it, many adults like the predictability of schedules also. I know I have everything scheduled on my phone in my calendar with reminders so that I know where I'm supposed to be and what I'm supposed to be doing. A lot of teachers, at least I know I did when I was in the school setting, followed the staff meeting agenda to know like what's coming next, how long are we here, when do we get out of here? And then sometimes, like if you think about church, maybe you have an agenda that you follow along and you mark things off so you know what's coming next. What about a student that has a lot of anxiety and behavior? Especially if you're transitioning from a super fun activity to something that's not really fun or they don't like at all. You might see some meltdowns, or you might see some aggressive behaviors. Well, a visual schedule can help support reducing those behaviors. It signals the end of an activity and it shows the beginning of the next. So what I'm trying to get at is visual schedules might become your new best friend. Your first step is going to be choosing which format to start with. You're going to need to consider the student's skills and needs, and then you'll want to collaborate with your team, your related service providers. It's really important to be aware that there are several choices that you can make regarding what the student schedule will look like and how it will be used so that it is super individualized and it works really well for that student. Not all of the students in your classroom are going to have the same type of schedule. And because we want to make sure that their schedule is super meaningful and functional for them, we have a lot of different options when it comes to student schedules. If it's not meaningful, they're not going to use it. So it's a really important piece. We want to make sure it's meaningful and functional. This slide shows the development progression from more concrete, so all the way over there on the left of the slide, over to the more abstract. So first, we know a student will learn to understand objects, then photographs, then drawings or images that represent photographs, then words. So one thing we want to note with this, and it's not on the slide, is that words should be paired with every one of those other types of schedule formats. So you can pair words with drawings or photographs or objects, and you should, because this promotes literacy. And it's also a lot easier to fade your picture or drawing later if the word's already there. We also have some digital format options for you to look at because technology can always be incorporated to most of these schedule formats.
Yeah, thanks for setting the stage for us, Jenny. This to me is the fun part. Like, what kind of a schedule are we going to use? What can they look like? And we have lots of examples to show you. So the first one is an object schedule. And so we think about what student needs could be supported by an object schedule. Definitely students who are low or no vision and who aren't developmentally ready for pictures can use an object schedule. However, this could also be used for students who don't yet attach meaning to photographs, and so they need the object for comprehension and understanding, or it could be for a student who just isn't attending to a visual schedule yet. Maybe they're just grabbing at their schedule without looking, they're not really paying attention and comprehending what it means. So objects are more engaging, and it can be a fun way to start teaching a schedule. It's also more fun if you're having trouble getting a student to just engage with a schedule at all. You might try objects just to get them started. So when using an object schedule, it's important to carefully consider the objects that you're choosing, especially for things like using the bathroom. Is it age appropriate? Will it embarrass anyone? Is it readily available and easy to replace if it's lost? Because they will get lost, right? We have to replace our schedule pieces frequently. And then can it be used as a student gets older so they don't have to learn a new object for that activity? And that's especially important for a student who may always need an object schedule. Another note is that for students who are low vision or blind, they'll always need a tactile or an auditory schedule. And if you're needing more information for that specific population of students, a quick Google search on tactile schedules will give you a ton of information. The next type of schedule is a schedule with photographs. So you might need to use photographs of the student's actual environment for a student who's not attaching meaning to a drawing, or if a student is having trouble discriminating pictures, like with line drawings, but they will attend to a picture of an actual thing. So this is where you would want to start with those students. It's important that you use photographs of actual people and places that they're familiar with and they'll recognize. If they're not yet discriminating between pictures, they may not understand that a different picture of something similar is still the same thing. And so the schedule on the left in orange, you can see only 3 activities at a time. So the whole day might have been too much or too overwhelming for this student to look at. So their team has broken it up into a smaller chunk. And you might be able to have like a morning schedule and then an afternoon schedule. Or for some students, you might need to break it down even further and just have them look at a few maybe activities at a time. And we'll talk about that a little later too. So as we go through the next few slides, you're going to see examples of different lengths of schedules. Just keep in mind that what you're seeing might only be part of the schedule that the student uses for the day. So you might not be seeing the whole thing because sometimes it needs to be chunked. So schedules with drawings or icons. This is probably the type of schedule you think about when you think of individual student schedules. And like Jenny said, your hands may be cramping just thinking about cutting out all the pieces. So there are some prerequisite skills that you need to consider though, if you're going to use this type of schedule, especially the ability to discriminate between pictures and to understand that a picture represents an object. So if a student can do those things, they may be ready for this type of schedule. If they have those skills, but they're struggling with attending, or they're just totally tuning out a visual cue or a timer, or really struggling with transitions between activities, those may be students that would be supported by this type of schedule. These schedules are really easy to customize. It's one reason we love them. And they can include photos as well. Like you can see in the example on the left that's blown up a little bit, there's a picture of a related service provider. So the student knows when they'll be seeing that person. So you can incorporate photos within these. In the middle of the slide is a schedule that's magnetic and it's been posted on the classroom whiteboard. So there's another option. We've seen this kind of a schedule work really well in secondary classrooms when you're grouping students and maybe that group is rotating to kind of help students keep track of where they go next. Another option that uses drawings is the ChoiceWorks app. That's what you can see on the right side of the screen. And that can be used both at school and home. So for a student who uses that, it would be easy to use that in all environments. And just a little tip for Velcro. With schedules and visual supports, communication icons, anything you're using Velcro with, be consistent about which object you place the smooth or the loop side of the Velcro on. We suggest that you put that on the schedule or the stationary item, and then the hook or the rough side on all of your icons or pictures. That way, your pictures can be used in a variety of places and it will be compatible with everything that you're using. The important thing is just to be consistent with it. Here's some more examples of Velcro schedules. And I just love how creative teachers are and how many different ways they can come up with to use it. So one important thing to note with a Velcro schedule is that there's going to be a lot of pieces. And you're going to want to print extras of everything because they're easily lost, they're destroyed, sometimes purposefully, they get dirty, or sometimes the student will take them and hide them when they don't want to go to a location on their schedule. I know that from experience, but if you plan for it and you've got extra icons, it's really not a big deal. Hey, look, friend, I've got another blue icon. Here you go. And it makes it easy and quick. You could also have a schedule like you see at the top of this screen where they close the flap as they complete activities. And I love that. That's something I never would have thought of. Or maybe they're all closed at the beginning because it's overwhelming to see them all and the student opens them one at a time as they complete it. One challenge with this type of schedule, so something you're going to need to think about and plan ahead if you choose this, is how you're going to handle changes with that schedule type. It might be as simple as covering that activity with a Post-it note, but is there some way, or putting Velcro, clear Velcro on top of it so you can stick a different icon on top if it changes? But just thinking about how you'll address that. And then I want to point out something else that enthusiastic teachers often overlook: the placement of schedules in the classroom. So the example on the far right of the screen, you can see those 4 or 5 schedules there on that green divider. Those schedules are placed pretty close together. They look great, and clearly that teacher has taken a lot of effort and time to prepare the schedules. And I don't want to take away from that, but I do just want to express that my concern would be as students go to their schedules, they're going to be bumping into each other. There might be an elbow flying here or there, maybe a shove. I don't know. I think all kinds of things can happen. I know all kinds of things can happen related to behavior issues, frustration, when they can't get to their schedule easily, or too many students are in the same place at one time. So just to consider that. And then another thing that I would want to ask is if these students might be ready for a more simple schedule, like a checkbox format. If they can keep up with that amount of icons, little bitty pictures, and they can see their whole day at once, I would kind of question whether this schedule is what they need and whether it's the easiest for the teacher to implement. It's a lot of work for a teacher if they're all on that schedule. And then another thing to consider is that schedules can be kept at the student's desk, or they could be attached to a student's wheelchair. It doesn't always have to be across the room where they have to go to their schedule. Sometimes that process of getting them to their schedule needs to be eliminated, so we bring the schedule to them. So just keep in mind that the most important thing is in this realm is that students need to be able to access their schedule and use it as independently as possible. So we want to consider that and set them up for success. If you're using this kind of schedule, or if you've ever used this kind of schedule, you know how many pieces there are and what a management nightmare that can be. So students will need a place to put their icons when they've checked their schedule and pulled the next picture off. That might be a container near the schedule on the wall, like you see, or it might be a check-in system at each station that they go to and they put their icon. They match it on the check-in board. Here are some options for storage. You might have also noticed on the previous slide, there was a Ziploc bag stapled next to one of the schedules. That's another great option. It's easily replaceable if it gets torn up or whatever happens, it falls down, whatever. You can easily replace a Ziploc bag. It doesn't have to be difficult or a big deal. And there isn't one right way to do it. It will require some planning for you, though, to determine how you want that to work and make sure you have a plan in place before you teach that to your students. If you have several students on this type of a schedule, managing and storing those icons and resetting the schedule at the end of the day is also something to think about. My favorite storage for icons was just a simple, clear tackle box like you get at Walmart that's cheap and easy. But I also love this pocket chart that's in the example here on the slide. That's another great option. And one idea for resetting schedules would be to take a picture of the schedule when it's complete and ready to be used. And then at the end of the day, allow a student to reset schedules following the picture. It's just an option. You can do whatever works for you, but that is a great job for a student. It doesn't have to be the student who uses that type of schedule. It can be any student who's able to do that job. Now let's talk about portable schedules. So we've seen some schedules that are usually in a stationary place on the wall, maybe at a student's desk or at their wheelchair, but what about portable schedules that they can take with them? Students who are ready for this type of schedule are the students who are traveling to multiple places in the building. Maybe they're in general education for some of their day or all of their day, but they may still need a schedule. Students who've been successful with a Velcro schedule, but they can look at it and they know where to go without actually taking the pieces off, they're ready to move on to a more static schedule. The next step is usually to put your schedule, to print it out on paper or laminate it with both words and pictures on the page, but there could be another step in there. For example, you might put a Velcro schedule in a binder like you see on the far left. And that's great for a student who still needs to manipulate the pieces one at a time and putting it in the binder. Maybe they're going to general education class, but they need that activity of moving the pieces over one at a time. By putting it in the binder, you make it a little more age appropriate and they're able to carry it with them when they go. You can put schedules on binders or in binders or on clipboards like you see here. Some students can keep up with that and they can carry their schedule from place to place, even within the classroom, and know where it's at. One challenge I had when I moved students from a Velcro schedule to like a clipboard that I wanted them to carry with them is they had trouble keeping up with it and they never had the clipboard. It wasn't ever where it was supposed to be. So one thing I did that was really helpful to make that transition is to start with the clipboard in a stationary place. Like I would just Velcro it to their cubby or to their desk, somewhere where it lived for a while they got used to that type of schedule. And then we worked on them carrying it around the room. So some of your students, you might need to kind of ease them in a little bit. Regardless of the format, it's important that there is a way for students to indicate when they finish that activity. So it might be a checkbox, it might be moving that picture, that icon over, whatever it is, we want to give them a way to mark that they finished. And then just thinking about portable schedules, we want to make sure that it's something students can use in all of the environments that they're in throughout the day. Okay, next we're going to talk about schedules with words. So obviously, students who can read can be given a schedule with words. But we want to keep in mind that even if they can read, they might need pictures to support comprehension. So just because they can read, that's not the only criteria for using a word-only schedule. We need them to be able to, or they also need to be able to understand what they've read, and we need them to be able to understand, right? So you could use a word-only schedule for secondary students who need support with those executive function skills, like staying organized, time management, and short-term memory. I don't know about you, but as an adult, I use these kinds of things to organize my day. And I love a good checkbox. If I can check it off, that makes me happy. And our students are no different. We want to provide them with those supports that they can use throughout their day as well. So here are a few examples. It could be really simple. The Post-it note example on the left, I love because it could be something that a student needs in the moment. It's a quick, easy thing to get them through. Maybe something changed. Maybe something started out rough in their day and they're needing some support that they haven't usually had access to, and you've got that. Or maybe they write out their own schedule. There are a lot of options here, but there are things that we can do to support our students in those situations too. And then another option is to teach students to use digital calendars and planners. Jenny already mentioned using her phone for reminders and keeping track of her calendar, and I'm absolutely the same way. I would be embarrassed to show you all my reminders app on my phone right now because of how many things are in there. I use it for everything from remembering to pick my kids up from school to, whatever else it is that I need to do. So we could teach students to use a phone if that's appropriate for their age level. We could use an iPad or a laptop or Chromebook, which are things that many students already use every day. So teaching them to use the calendar or reminders app on their phone or their computer to keep track of due dates is a great way to prepare them for life beyond school. We would be lost without those kinds of organization systems in our lives, most of us. And so we want to provide that for our students. In the middle of the screen, you'll see a Google Classroom calendar that one teacher has used with his students in a general education classroom. Google does have great features for organization and time management. This is the example of the daily agenda for this 4th grade class, and he shares it with his class on Google Classroom. So students are able to pull that up on their Chromebook throughout the day, and they can utilize that support as they need it. And I have a feeling that there are some students who need it more than others, and that's great. It's available for everyone. And then I blew that up a little bit so you can see that there are some details for what they can expect in each part of their day. And I love that even more because it gives them the amount of detail that they need to know what's coming and what they need to be prepared for. If you notice, there are also some pictures on the schedule. So with more traditional schedules, we can still include pictures. This assists students who are easily overwhelmed and anxious. It will assist them in those moments, but also pictures support everyone. I love pictures. They help me remember things too. So there are a lot of things that we can almost incorporate different aspects of these different schedules in other places. All right, team collaboration. This is a biggie. Collaboration with the team is essential when determining what type of schedule we're going to use for a student. Just by collaborating, it could make the difference between a schedule that is successful for the student and one that isn't. We can save ourselves some time by talking to each other and communicating on the front end. And the teacher can't be expected to have expertise in every area, even though I know as special education teachers, sometimes we feel kind of the weight of that, like we need to know everything, but we don't and we can't. So use your team. Collaboration between general and special education teachers will make sure that the students' needs in both environments are considered. If I, as the special education teacher, am writing a schedule or creating a schedule for a student who goes to general education, and I don't consider the needs in that environment, then I'm probably going to miss something because I won't understand everything that he needs there. And then consult with your speech language pathologist. The schedule needs to match the student's communication system and any other visual supports that are already in place. We want to make sure that we're having consistency across the board. And then for occupational therapy, if the student has fine motor control or dexterity issues, there are a lot of ways that those schedules can be adapted to meet their needs. Maybe it's as simple as attaching a pom-pom to the picture so they can grasp it and pick it up. So it could be something that as a teacher, I never would have thought of, but the OT can help me with that. And then for physical therapy, if the student's in a wheelchair or has another mobility consideration, consider where their schedule is going to be located so that they can access it. We've seen beautiful student schedules that aren't accessible to a student in a wheelchair because they just can't get there. So that schedule isn't going to help that student if that's the case. We want to make sure that we're bringing those related service providers in and kind of troubleshooting how can we help this student access their schedule. And then the vision or hearing specialist. If a student has a visual or hearing impairment, there might be things that need to be considered that a classroom teacher wouldn't think of. Support staff, our paraprofessionals, our instructional assistants, they work really closely with our students and they often observe things that maybe we don't. They can be really tuned into what works for students just because they do work so closely with them. So consider getting input from them as well. And then lastly, parents and families. So whatever type of schedule you end up using that works with a student, be sure you share that with their family. Tell them about that. Tell them what's working and what isn't. They might want to use that same type of schedule for their daily living activities at home, or definitely for virtual learning situations. And then you can even go an extra step and show them how to grab the images off the internet, share any resources you have with them, and empower them to use those strategies at home that are working at school. On a side note, if you share those resources and help them with that, that happens to make you distinguished in 1E on tests. So there's a little bonus. Okay, now we're going to address an elephant in the room or some common misconceptions about student schedules. So misconception number one, students become more rigid when they have a visual schedule and they're going to need it for life. They may need it for life, but no one talks smack about people with planners and calendars. We call them successful people, right? So let's teach our students to use the things that can make them successful, and they can use it for life. Misconception number two, once a student knows the classroom schedule, they don't need a visual schedule anymore. Well, I would counter that I remember most of what's on my weekly grocery list, but I still need the list because sometimes it changes or I want to add something to it and I can't remember it all. Also, if I'm really anxious or overwhelmed, my working memory is affected and I definitely need the list. I can't even remember the 5 things that I buy every time I go to the store in that case. And the same is true for our students. And then misconception number 3, not everyone needs visual schedules. That's true that not everyone needs, or it may be true that not everyone needs a 3-foot visual schedule with 50 separate pieces, but everyone does need a way to organize their day. And so we can support all students. Thinking back to that example on the slide with the Google Classroom, like daily agenda, that supports students in a general education classroom. Some of them may use it more than others, but I bet that there are times when all of those students access that schedule so that they know what's coming next. And then as the student skill level increases, we have to increase the complexity of the student schedule to match it. It's important to stick with a schedule type for as long as the student needs us to, but we also don't want to hold them back. So there's no hard and fast rule on when to move them to the next schedule type, but we'll talk about a few things that might help. And this is going to look different based on the student's skills and the types of schedules you're moving between. I'll tell you a quick story about a student I had. This was a kindergarten student, and she started off with a Velcro schedule, which was completely appropriate for her when she started the year. She needed a lot of help with reducing her anxiety, structure and predictability, and the Velcro schedule was great. However, it was a really clear sign to me that I needed to move her to a different type of schedule when she started going around to other people's desks and marking off their dry erase schedule. She would go fill off their little check boxes for them. And I was like, first, I spent a couple days trying to get her to stop, first of all, because she was marking everybody else's schedules for them. And so I, would try to direct her back to her schedule. And then I had that aha light bulb moment that was like, oh, she just needs that kind of schedule for herself. And so once I set her up with a laminated dry erase checkbox schedule, she was ready to roll. She loved it. And a side note is she was also ready to transition to general education a little more because we'd spent a lot of time, she'd learned those beginning attending skills. And so having that checkbox schedule that she could take with her made that transition so much easier. She knew what she needed. I just needed to listen and pay attention to her cues. And not all students are going to be that obvious, right? Not everyone's going to show you that they're ready for the next kind of schedule. So you will need to consider where they're at and what they might be ready for. Another important note is we need to update student schedules when we make changes to our zoning plan or our classroom schedule. It's important that the classroom schedule, the zoning plan, the staff schedules, and the student schedules all match. Is that a lot of work? Yeah, unfortunately, I don't know a way around it. So I can't tell you any secret magic bullet, but it is really important to keep updating those things as they change and make sure everything matches. And then one last caution about Velcro. Don't start with Velcro if you don't have to, and don't stop with Velcro if they're ready to move on to something else. So Velcro is great for teaching a schedule because it's broken down into steps and it supports many students to be able to pick up that picture and actually manipulate it or move it. If they already know to move to the next place, maybe they don't need Velcro. It is best for students and it's easier for teachers to not have everyone on a Velcro schedule, unless of course everyone needs it. You will find that the managing piece of that as a teacher is really difficult. However, if that's a type of schedule your students need, then it's well worth the time and the effort to manage. Just consider individual students.
Okay, so now we've looked at all of the different types of schedules. And let's say that you have selected one that is appropriate for your student and you are ready to get started. How are you going to teach it? In our last training, we talked about classroom procedures and routines, and we talked about all of the strategies listed on this roadmap and how those strategies support teaching procedures and routines. Well, like I said earlier, using a schedule is a routine, and all of the strategies on the road sign are great for teaching those routines. So we are going to look at those through the lens of teaching student schedules. So the first step in your task analysis is that a transition signal occurs. It's going to be the cue that lets the students know that it's time to move to the next activity. And while we're here, we want to talk a little bit more about choosing a transition signal. So we know that transitions are hard. They're hard for many of our students. They have a really difficult time with them. And using a transition signal like a timer can help. So if the child doesn't want to move to the next station or activity, the timer is the reason we're transitioning. It's not our fault. The timer said it was time to move. That's worked for me so many times. They tend not to argue with the timer, although there are always exceptions. And for those that are sensitive to like loud alarm timer type sounds, there are a lot of different styles of timers out there, even on YouTube, that you can pull up and like play on a smart board. We've seen teachers use a maraca, different types of bells. So lots of options out there. If the noise type is an issue, there are a lot of ways to work around that. A really great strategy is to assign a specific person in your classroom to set the timer. It's really important that it's always set for consistency. Sometimes in your classroom, a paraprofessional will be the best person for that job. Sometimes it's the classroom teacher. It really depends on your schedule. Another idea is to use an Alexa or a Google Home device. You can set up a full day schedule on those and start it once and it will run the rest of the day. So that's pretty cool if you are into technology. We also suggest using an icon or an item. So we have two here that we see often. So you have like a little icon that says check schedule with a check mark, or a lot of times we see just a random item like a poker chip. And when the signal goes off, you hand them that item and it reminds them what they're supposed to do. So you would teach them when they receive it, they need to go to their schedule, place it in either a container or an envelope, and check their schedule or whatever the steps are in your procedure. And then also we want to remind teachers to give kids time to process and respond. As teachers, or maybe even as adults, our natural instinct is to start talking as soon as something doesn't move as fast as we want it to. So if the timer goes off and the students haven't moved yet, it's really important to pause, allow the transition signal to fully occur, and then give them time to process what that means and move on to the next step. As you'll see when we move forward, cleanup is one of the next things. So they need to have time to stop, think about what is the meaning of the timer and what they need to do next to get started. A lot of our students take a little bit longer to process, so this is a really important step. And now we're just going to go through a general task analysis. It would need to be adjusted for specific students. Some students will need more steps, some students wouldn't need as many. So this is just an idea. Our task analysis, as we talked about in the last training, breaks down and simplifies a task. It gives step-by-step instructions for the behaviors or skills that are needed to complete the task. We do this because sometimes skills can be difficult for learners to process as a whole. To be able to go through that whole process at one time is too much. And so we need to know which specific steps they need to work on to get that whole process or routine down. So like I said, cleanup is our next piece. So they need to clean up whatever materials they're working at where they are. And then maybe you have them go to their schedule. Maybe they're going to locate the word or the symbol. Maybe you handed them their icon. They're going to go place that in and then get their schedule item. And then they're going to go to the location on the schedule. So if you've written out your task analysis, it's okay if it's different than this. But then you see that the student's not being successful with that. One of the first things that you need to do is go back and make sure that the student has all of the skills in the task analysis that they need to complete this. So they may not have some prerequisite skills that they need, and you may need to go back and teach that directly, explicitly, maybe at discrete trial or in a small group, and then come back and try the bigger component of that, or the bigger step. Unexpected events. So we all know surprises happen. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're not so good. Sometimes it's a tornado drill and you're right in the middle of the best lesson you've had all day. But we know that a lot of our students have a hard time with unexpected changes. Sometimes it can be that they didn't get to go all the way through the same order of something that they have to do in the same order every time. Or, maybe they just don't like change in general. Basically, their executive function skill of flexibility is a deficit area for them, and they're going to need some support. So it's important that all of the different schedule types have some version of this. You're going to teach them how to respond when an unexpected event happens. You could have an icon. So we have 3 different options on the screen. They all say surprise, but they could say change. They could say unexpected. That's your choice. But to practice the skill, you're going to start with some fun, positive events that they will all be excited about, like an extra recess or a special treat. You will know what your students are interested in and would be excited by. So after they are used to the routine, doing fun, exciting things, and change and surprise or unexpected, whatever, isn't such a bad thing anymore. Like they're like, okay, we can go do this. Then you are going to start working on some neutral activities. So neutral means that it's not super fun, but it's not something that's going to upset them. And when you teach this, you are going to need to provide reinforcement. So as soon as they transition and do whatever the new thing is, provide whatever that student's reinforcer is. If that's a token, great, give them a token. If it's a Skittle, great, whatever that is. And this is going to increase the likelihood that when they see this icon in the future and something different's happening, that they're going to be okay and go along with it because they've practiced it and it's not so bad. So eventually something is going to happen that they don't like. So maybe it's a fire drill and they really hate that loud noise. Maybe it's a tornado drill, like I said earlier. Maybe it's a special school assembly. Whatever it is, you've taught how to handle it and they've had opportunities to practice. They're more likely to be okay with transitioning when they've had this special routine change taught. So it's a really good strategy. I recommend using it. Like I said, it doesn't have to be an icon. It doesn't have to say those specific words. It just needs to mean the change or surprise or whatever you choose. And it needs to be used consistently like that. And you don't want to use it for anything else. I almost forgot to say that. Whatever you choose, do not use it for any other icons. It needs to mean that specific thing. So, all right, data collection, my favorite. This is an example of a routine data sheet that we adapted. And this is one way that you could collect your data. So you're going to have a task analysis for your routine on the left side in the red box. It's customizable. You should be able to make it a fit for each student. At the bottom, you're going to have customizable criteria and the level that you consider mastery. So you're going to determine how often that you want them to take data. And if you don't have a preference, we recommend weekly. So if you work on it every day, weekly is a great data point. But if you're not meeting as often as every day, you might not want to collect every week. And while you are collecting your data, you need to make sure that you're reviewing it and reflecting. So on this data sheet, reflecting on the data, we might need to make a couple of changes. So reflecting on this data, we have 3 2s in a row. And so according to this, that is a correct response with a partial prompt for completing the step. So I would start thinking about why we might be at 2s every time on this step. Do we need a different or more powerful reinforcer? Do we need to take that step and teach it in discrete trial or small group? Do we need to use a different prompt? When you analyze your data, those are the kind of questions that you're going to go through to see what you need to do next or what changes you need to make. And so if you see 4s, that means that you need to make sure that you're providing reinforcement. So in this one, they went from a 2 to a 3 to a 4. And when they got to that 4 and they were independent for the first time, you need to make a really big deal out of it. Maybe you have a little dance party, like in the moment, 2-minute dance party or whatever it is, because they're doing it independently and you want to make that like the coolest thing ever. Also, when you get to a 4, you can start to generalize that skill across people in other settings and get them using that skill somewhere else. And a helpful tip is that you should select data days, or you could select data days and assign a staff member to that task. So when I was using routines in my classroom, we had certain routines that we collected on certain days. And so I had one person that was assigned to collect that data on each day. And it made the process quick and smooth. And then we got more data that way than when it wasn't assigned and it wasn't on a regular day. So that was a really good tip that helped me make sure that I was getting the data that I needed. This is our prompting hierarchy graphic, although it's not really a hierarchy in the sense that you might think of regular hierarchies. This is probably a new take. If you were at the last training, you've seen it, but if you haven't seen this training before, what we wanted to show is that it flows from most intrusive to least intrusive, or independent to dependent, and that it's a two-way street. You're going to be going both ways. So there isn't a one-stop shop out there for a prompting hierarchy. If you go to Google and you type in a prompting hierarchy, you're going to pull up any number of different graphics, and they're all going to look a little bit different, and the different prompting types may be in different orders. What we want you to take away from this is that those are the different types of prompts. You need to know what they are and how to use them and how they work together. So as we start designing our prompting levels or our process for students, you want to make sure that you're doing it individualized, because not every student will need every level of prompting on that graphic. The goal for prompting is to use it to get your student to the correct answer with as little intrusion as possible. What if it doesn't work? Sometimes that happens. Then you need to look at changing your prompt level. We want to look at changing what we're doing, not changing what the student's doing. And we don't want to stay doing the exact same thing over and over, waiting on them to catch on. We want to look at what we're doing and see what we can do to change to help get them where we want them to be. I'm sure that I said this last time, so if you're in the last training, you heard it, but we've all heard the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over and expecting something different to happen. But that's not going to be us with prompting. You're going to reflect on your data and make the changes you need to get the student moving forward. Now, there are some very specific steps for fading prompts, but for this training, we're going to go over some general guidelines, and in the future, we will give some more of those specific details. So the big key here is scaffolds and prompts are not meant to be permanent. If you've ever worked with a student that is prompt dependent, you've probably seen, you could see a couple different things, but one thing that you might see is you give them a direction and they put their hand in your hand and wait for you to walk them through the activity. So their prompts weren't faded. And so now they're dependent on somebody prompting them to complete the activity. That's why we want to make sure that we have a plan to fade out those prompts. Your data collection is going to help guide you through that. So here's the scoring guide from the data collection sheet that we looked at earlier. This student for this level had a full physical, a partial physical. They have verbal or gesture together at the same score. If your student needed every level of prompting on that graphic, you're going to have to edit this scoring guide to fit that because there are more than 4 prompts on there. So make sure that you're individualizing it for the students regarding the prompts, and that means you'll have to change your scoring guide too if you're using this type of a scoring guide. If they stall, stop, drop, and assess, and you're evaluating using your data. Your data collection is going to be how you're deciding if it's working, if it's not working, if you've stalled and you need to move forward. And then remember that you need to heavily reinforce when the students are even a tiny step more independent than they were in the past. In my classroom, anything that was done independently, the first 1 to 3 times that they did it independently, it was a big deal, like party, it's the best day ever. And then you don't want to stop reinforcing, but you don't have to make a big deal out of it forever. You can scale back your reinforcement, but continue to reinforce. Don't stop reinforcing something just because they're doing it independently. And just a quick note about reinforcement. We have an entire training on this. So if you want more details, feel free to go and check that out. It is also recorded and on the website. But specific to student schedules, you are going to have some options regarding reinforcement. You can reinforce at a class level, a group level, or an individual student level. It could be something that you're giving them in the moment, or it could be a fun activity where you're going to stop, drop, and do something fun. It's really important to reinforce when students are independent with new skills. I know I just said that, but it's so important. Maybe you have a student and they're struggling to complete all of the steps in their check the schedule routine. So in that case, you're going to pull that step and you may have to explicitly teach it. You're going to do some direct teaching and you are going to provide reinforcement as they are moving ahead. Like if you're fading out prompts, every time they move up, you're going to provide that reinforcement. Maybe it is a token. Maybe they are using a token board and they get a token, or maybe it's a peppermint. It could be anything, a gummy bear, a toy, whatever it is. That's just an example. Maybe you're teaching a small group or a big group. This still applies. For example, maybe you are working on transitions in your first grade classroom. And you have a signal that you use, and they're all supposed to go to their next location without you having to stop and move them around and direct people on where to go. The first time that they do that without you having to provide any prompts, that's a party. Like stop, drop, and do something fun. Maybe they all get a mint, or maybe you take 5 minutes and add some extra recess time in, or whatever the fun thing is that you have planned. Maybe it's that you have a marble jar and they're earning a class reward, pizza party, balloons, bubbles, whatever. Maybe you put some marbles in the jar so that they're getting more to earn toward that. But the bottom line is, make sure that you are providing reinforcement, especially for those new skills, and make sure that you're prepared. If you've seen the previous training on reinforcement, you know that the gold standard is 1 to 3 seconds for providing reinforcement. Obviously, if it's a small group or a large group, that's not attainable, but you want to get it to them as quick as possible, and you want to have an idea of what you're going to give them. So make sure that you have a plan for reinforcement when you get started. Oh, and also make sure that you are providing verbal praise and social interaction along with any items or activities that you're providing, because we want to build in the desire for, a high five, way to go, that's awesome. Like, we want to build in those behaviors for positive praise. So make sure that you are using that as well. Okay, pro tips. First, you need to make sure that your classroom is set up and it's clearly labeled so that your students know where to go. If you need some more support with that, we also have a zoning plan training that can support you there. It's also videoed and on the website. You want to make sure that you're teaching the routine. It's worth the time it takes to teach it. Just like teachers at the beginning of the year spend a significant amount of time teaching all of their classroom procedures and routines, this needs to be taught, and it's okay if it takes some time out of your day. We encourage you to slow everything down when you first start teaching this new routine. It's just as important as academic instruction. And like we said earlier, when they get in this routine and it's running smooth, it's going to buy you back some instructional time. When you're teaching the skill, it really helps if you have super fun, engaging activities, because they want to transition and come to the super fun thing that you have planned at the next place. So making sure that you really focus in on fun, engaging activities when you first begin teaching this is also really important. It will help you in avoiding a power struggle. You do not want to get in a power struggle over this or make it aversive, because it's really important to your classroom. You want to make it fun and enjoyable and something that they want to do. And consistency is so important. You have to run your schedule with fidelity all day long, every day. Even on Fridays when it's, everyone's tired and you're ready for the weekend, you can change up what you do on the schedule, but you still have to use a consistent schedule, rotations, follow the schedule. You can't just throw the schedule out for the day. It's really important when you're teaching this routine that you keep your schedule in place and everything matches the schedule, except for, those unplanned emergencies. So what if you've done all of the things that we're talking about and it still isn't working? Here are a few tips for troubleshooting. You can use a peer buddy and pair a favorite person to teach the new routine. Peer-assisted learning is a powerful teaching strategy. Assign a staff member to a specific student for prompting and reinforcement. So you need to decide if the sending adult or the receiving adult will be prompting and reinforcing the student in the moment. So for example, if I'm teaching at the blue station and my student goes to the red station with Daylene, we need to know if I'm responsible for prompting and getting the student over to Daylene, or she's responsible for coming and getting the student and guiding him over there. And it may be helpful to start with a first then format. So we talk about first then in our visual supports training, but if you want just a quick overview, we've got one. We have an example of a first then on the screen. So you are showing them what's going to happen first and what happens next. It's really helpful if you start with two super fun things, and then you can work in some work activities. You need to make sure that you're giving them the choice of what's on the then piece so that they are interested in getting to then and they will do the first activity. It's a good place to start if the others aren't successful. If they're having any challenging behavior, this is a place where you can begin to get you rolling, and then you can transition into another type of schedule.
Okay, so we are going to take a few minutes to watch a video. This is a candid video from a real classroom during a transition time. Everything in this video it's not all perfect, but it is all real. And so some things I want you to look for, and we'll have some boxes that pop up with words in them to help you kind of point out what we want you to look at. But just think about the use of schedules and the strategies that we've talked about today as you go through. If you're watching this as a recording, you may want to stop it and go back a couple times. It's a little bit hard to catch everything. It's like I said, it's a real classroom and there are things happening pretty quickly in real time.
It's time to check schedules.
But we're
Yes,
just
one
hungry.
more. Listen, you have one more. Let's get the schedule. You have one more. And then it's time for snack. Yes, almost snack time. One more. Check your schedule. Go see.
But
Go show
I'm
you.
hungry.
And look at your schedule and see where snack is.
You can go check the
Check your
schedule. The Santa tell Baxter loves cuddle. I'm just hungry.
What is that?
For snack yet?
Let it. Yes.
Okay.
Time for snack yet?
Rexton, I'm at your badge. Okay, Rexton,
I
you
know
got
you
it.
get hungry. I know. It's
Right
almost time for snack. Thank you for checking your schedule nicely.
But we have to have snack. We get circle time off
For
the
the whole
way.
thing.
At 9:20 we have snack.
But
Good job. Let's go.
But snack time. But
Nice
but
job.
snack time.
Do you want the game or the sand first?
This is. You let it.
Find your chair. You're doing great. Yeah, that one's yours. Have a seat, please.
Wait, but
Thank you for helping
I'm
us.
about to ready for you, okay?
Okay, Keisha, know what's coming. I'm gonna take these.
It is time.
I'm hungry.
Okay.
Are you gonna earn your big
Good job,
M&M or a little
Susan.
M&M? Which one do you want? A big one or a little one?
Hi, Braxton. What are we playing today?
Let's go to food. I'm hungry.
You can have a snack at 9:20. 18 more minutes. My turn.
I said I'm hungry. Please.
Do we do game or sand?
Dash, as soon as you're at your table, you can get your gummy bear and your points. Check it. Are you earning a big M&M
What are you drinking?
or points? I'm gonna get my points out so people over at the table can get points.
Sand or do?
Oh, you can give us a gummy bear.
Addison, can I scan your card for being in the station ready to learn?
But it's not here.
Oh, you're missing yours. Let me find it.
Keep missing my bed, and I don't know why.
Did you want the Play-Doh with it? Okay, yes or no?
Okay, Addison, I gave you a point. Matthew, can I scan your card for being at your station? Okay,
What are on?
Did you put your iPad?
thank you.
Go see if your iPad's in your backpack.
Good job.
Thank you.
Where should you be?
Go look and see. I don't know if it has it at all.
Are you making a red choice or a green choice?
Green choice.
Okay, then go to your station. Take the chair up and go to your station.
Oh, I guess what I said.
You need to go check your
We're
schedule.
just, yeah, this goes.
You both,
Thank you, Bash. Good choice.
no, you both. No, I'm gonna start.
As soon as you're at your station, I'm going to choose a gummy bear for you. Addison, you're still at your station. Addison and Matthew, can you get your whiteboards out and practice writing your whole name? Practice writing all of your name. Okay, I'll give you one next time. Can you see that was already a job? Thank you. Okay, I have a green M&M.
Yeah, Miss Matthew.
When you check your schedule. Come
You
on.
both.
Good job. Now write Pantera. Come on, walk with me. Come on, let's go. Thank you, Matthew. Come on, let's go. Let's go
Good
check
job.
schedule.
Hey, touch your nose.
Okay, so a couple things I wanted to point out about that video. First of all, it was pajama day, and you might have recognized somebody in the video. That was my real life classroom. And everything wasn't perfect. There was a little bit too much adult talking at one point. There were some times where I thought, why didn't I use a visual for that? And I also wanted to point out that I had my phone out because we had a positive behavior intervention support PBIS system in our school where students earned points. And so a lot of my students at this point really, really liked that. And I needed to pair it with immediate reinforcement in the moment. But that's what I was doing with my phone, just in case you were wondering. And there were a lot of things to think about in that video. So not only student schedules, but like Jenny was talking to us about prompting, moving up and down the prompting hierarchy, and reinforcement was really important. We couldn't stop reinforcing just because they were using those skills. And then there were some students who you saw not doing the right thing, and they needed that reminder of what reinforcement was coming. And then there was the young man who never really did do what he was supposed to do, even when I was moving up and down the prompting hierarchy. And you didn't get to see how that ended. But just if you're watching this with someone else or with a team or even by yourself, you might pause it for a minute or even go back and watch it again and just think about what did you learn? What did you see? Did you watch the happy dance at the beginning? Because that's one of my favorite parts. There was a happy dance in there. And then thinking about the different kinds of schedules that students had. So there was the young man who was doing the happy dance at the beginning. He went to his cubby and he picked up like a book box, and it had his schedule on a clipboard in it. So he had a portable schedule that he was successfully using. Several other students have a checkbox schedule that was on a clipboard, and you saw those they were stationary at their cubbies, like I mentioned earlier in the training. One student had kind of an unusual checkbox. I was working toward a checkbox schedule, but he wasn't quite there. So his icons on the same type of schedule on a clipboard actually pulled off still. He was the student that was assisted by his peer, the young man in the blue Spider-Man shirt. But he did have kind of a unique schedule that he's the only student I ever used that schedule for, because he needed that step in between. And then the youngest student, he was new to the classroom. He hadn't been there very long, and he was still back at the pull it off one at a time Velcro schedule that you saw. So there were a wide variety of schedules that we were using and moving students through.